Remember when Sabrina the Teenage Witch seemed like the most wholesome show on television? A sweet blonde girl figuring out her powers, one clumsy spell at a time, two quirky ants running a house full of chaos, a sarcastic talking cat who somehow got the best lines in every single episode, and just enough magic to make homework disappear before dinner. For years, audiences saw a cozy Friday night sitcom about a witch learning to fly a broom without crashing into a wall or turning her boyfriend into a hamster. But behind the scenes, the real story was a lot stranger, a lot messier, and honestly a lot more dramatic than anyone curled up on their couch back in 1996 ever could have realized. We are talking network executives fighting over who should even play Sabrina in the first place, a future superstar actress who almost took the role and became a vampire slayer instead. A real-life kiss that had absolutely nothing to do with the script, and a series finale twist that had secretly been planted since episode 1 and nobody noticed for years. And trust us, you are not even close to ready for what is waiting near the top of this list. This is a show that survived a network jump, a title crisis, at least one holiday rewritten because of a national tragedy, and a rotating cast of aunts, boyfriends, and best friends who came and went without so much as a farewell scene. And somehow, it still managed to stick the landing with an ending fans are still talking about decades later. So, hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and let us know your favorite Spellman family memory down in the comments below. Now, let us get into the countdown with number 15. Number 15, the best friend who vanished without a single word of explanation. In the very first season, Sabrina's closest confidant at school was a girl named Jenny Kelly, played by actress Michelle Beaudoin. She was right there in nearly every early episode, gossiping at the mall, rolling her eyes at Sabrina's magical mishaps, and generally acting like a completely normal fixture of the show's entire high school world. Then season 2 rolled around, and Jenny was simply gone, as if the other realm had reached down and quietly erased her from existence. No goodbye scene, no farewell episode, not even a single passing line explaining that she had moved away or transferred schools somewhere else. Fans just had to quietly accept that Sabrina apparently forgot her own best friend existed practically overnight. Years later, Melissa Joan Hart finally addressed the mystery in an interview, explaining that the show's entire supporting cast quietly shifted every single season depending on audience reaction. And sometimes contract negotiations simply fell apart behind closed doors before anyone watching at home ever had a clue. So, yeah, Jenny Kelly did not get erased by a spell gone horribly wrong, or banished off to another dimension entirely. She got erased by ordinary network politics, which honestly might be the scarier kind of magic when you really think about it. What makes the whole thing even funnier in hindsight is that Sabrina's world quietly replaced her with a rotating cast of new friends and classmates over the following seasons. And the show simply moved forward as though nothing unusual had ever taken place at all. Nobody in universe ever brought up Jenny again, not even in passing conversation, which is honestly a level of continuity denial most soap operas would envy. For a show built entirely around magical consequences, the biggest disappearing act on Sabrina turned out to have absolutely nothing to do with witchcraft whatsoever. Number 14, the boyfriend that budget cuts quietly deleted from the story. Heading into the final stretch of the series, Sabrina's college love interest Miles seemed like a fairly permanent fixture of her new grown-up life, away from high school hallways and lockers. But when it came time to actually film the 7th and final season, Miles simply vanished from the storyline entirely, and it was not because of some dramatic on-screen breakup or a spell that erased him from existence forever. Producers openly admitted the character was cut largely because of tightening production budgets that season, and because fans just were not warming up to him the way the writers had originally hoped they would when they first introduced him. And what makes it even stranger is that this happened during the exact same chaotic final season, where Sabrina's entire supporting cast, her job at a magazine, her apartment, and even her longtime aunts were all being rewritten and shuffled around on the fly at the same time. So, while Sabrina was busy discovering that witchcraft could not fix absolutely everything in her life, the network was quietly discovering that neither could a shrinking budget fix a struggling storyline nobody asked for. Miles simply stopped being mentioned once filming wrapped, joining a fairly long list of Sabrina love interests who quietly exited the show without so much as a farewell scene or a single line of dialogue explaining where they went. And what makes it even more ironic is that this kept happening to a character whose entire premise revolved around literal magic and endless possibility. Turns out no spell in the Spellman family's book was ever quite powerful enough to protect a character from a producer holding a shrinking budget spreadsheet. Number 13, Salem the cat was never actually just one single cat. The Spellman's sarcastic feline sidekick looked completely consistent on screen week after week, smirking his way through insults and delivering perfectly timed one-liners episode after episode for 7 straight years without missing a beat. But here is where it gets weird. Behind that single beloved character were 7 real live cats working at any given time on set, plus 2 fully animatronic versions and 2 stuffed prop cats reserved specifically for scenes considered too rough, too dangerous, or simply too unpredictable for an actual living animal to safely perform. Each individual cat reportedly had its own specialty. One was trained specifically to jump on cue, another stayed calm enough to be held comfortably during long, uninterrupted takes, and another was perfect for batting at a ball of yarn during quick throwaway gags between scenes. Melissa Joan Hart later revealed in an interview that the cats were deliberately fed only just enough to stay motivated during long filming days, because once they were full and satisfied, they would simply refuse to perform another single take no matter how much coaxing anyone tried. Turns out, the most powerful witch on the entire show was never actually Sabrina at all. It was whichever cat happened to have skipped breakfast that particular morning. And even with an entire team of feline stand-ins and a couple of mechanical backups on standby, a real cat was still used for plenty of close-up shots, meaning the crew basically had to manage a tiny furry ensemble cast, working alongside the human actors every single day. Salem's sarcastic dialogue was voiced the entire time by Nick Bakay, who also worked as a writer and producer on the series behind the scenes. Somehow, that tracks perfectly with everything we already knew about cats and their general disdain for schedules. Number 12, the show almost lost Sabrina's own name right off the title card. By season 5, Sabrina Spellman was no longer technically a teenager at all. She was off living in a college dorm, surrounded by new roommates. And network executives suddenly decided the title Sabrina the Teenage Witch did not quite fit the show anymore. Their proposed solution was refreshingly simple. Just rename the entire long-running series to plain old Sabrina and move on. Sounds harmless enough, right? Not exactly. Archie Comics, the publisher that still legally owned the original character and every single licensing right attached to her, flatly refused to allow that particular change to happen no matter how the network pushed. The compromise that eventually followed ended up being genuinely messy in practice, with the WB network still quietly advertising the show in certain markets as simply Sabrina or Sabrina Goes to College, even though its official broadcast title on screen never technically changed at all. So, for one strange stretch of the show's later run, viewers were technically watching a series still legally called Sabrina the Teenage Witch, while every promotional poster in sight pretended otherwise entirely. Casual fans flipping through TV guides at the time genuinely had no idea whether they were tuning into the same series or some kind of quiet spin-off, since the branding shifted depending entirely on which market or which magazine happened to be advertising it that particular week. And what makes it even funnier is that the title confusion never actually got resolved on screen either, meaning the show spent its final seasons technically fighting an identity crisis that had absolutely nothing to do with magic at all. Number 11, a beloved holiday episode got secretly rewritten because of a real-world tragedy. For season 6, the episode that eventually aired under the title A Birthday Witch was originally written and fully planned from the start as a proper Christmas special for the entire Spellman family. But after the September 11th attacks in 2001, the WB network made a decision that rippled across its entire programming lineup that fall, requesting that none of its shows air Christmas-themed episodes that particular year, fearing the wrong tone entirely during such a heavy national moment for everyone watching at home. That meant Sabrina's writers had to scramble at the absolute last minute, reworking an already finished holiday script into a birthday celebration story instead, practically overnight and under real deadline pressure. And what makes it even more unsettling in hindsight is how seamless the final broadcast cut actually looks to modern viewers, with barely a single hint remaining anywhere that the entire premise had been quietly swapped out under pressure just weeks before it ever aired to a national audience. Entire scenes built around decorations, dialogue, and holiday-themed plotlines had to be reworked into a birthday framework almost overnight, which honestly says a lot about how quickly network television could pivot when the entire national mood suddenly shifted underneath it. Most fans rewatching the episode today would never guess it started life as something completely different, which might be one of the sneakiest last-minute rewrites in the show's entire 7-season history. It is a small but telling reminder that even the lightest, fluffiest sitcoms of the era were not immune to the ripple effects of a genuinely difficult national moment happening far beyond the studio walls. Okay, we have to take a quick pause here, because if you are enjoying these behind-the-scenes stories, do us a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and let us know down in the comments which one of these has surprised you the absolute most so far. We have already covered a vanishing best friend, a budget-cut boyfriend, 7 different cats, a title crisis, and a Christmas episode rewritten because of world events. And honestly, the second half of this list gets even wilder. All right, let us get back into the countdown with number 10, because things are about to get a whole lot more personal from here on out. Number 10, the celebrity guest who eventually wore out his welcome completely. Sabrina brought in an absolutely endless parade of 90s celebrities as guest stars over the years, and Melissa Joan Hart later admitted she partied with quite a few of them off camera as well, far away from any camera crew or watchful producer. But not every single friendship actually clicked the way you might expect it to behind the scenes. In her memoir, Hart revealed that she and Ashton Kutcher, who was starring on That 70s Show at roughly the exact same time as her own show, simply did not get along at all once the cameras stopped rolling. According to her account, Kutcher had a habit of making smart-ass remarks at social gatherings, and Hart openly admitted she ended up physically kicking him out of parties at her own home, not once, but twice within a fairly short window of time. Believe it or not, the actress playing a sweet, wide-eyed teenage witch every week on network television was also quietly the one deciding which 90s heartthrobs were and were not allowed back through her own front door ever again. It is a genuinely strange bit of contrast when you sit with it. A wholesome family sitcom star spending her weekends bouncing between celebrity gatherings and deciding in real time whose attitude had crossed the line for the evening. And considering how many other massive names cycled through her circle during those same years, Kutcher being the one specifically singled out for getting the boot says a lot about just how memorable that particular attitude apparently was. Meanwhile, other guest stars like the members of a certain chart-topping boy band ended up becoming genuine long-term friends, proving her front door policy was clearly not about fame at all, just plain old attitude. Number 9. The aunt who almost broke boundaries the show never actually got credit for. Sabrina's original showrunner, Nell Scovell, later revealed a casting idea that could have completely reshaped the entire show's identity from the very ground up before a single episode was filmed. Her own agents had pitched the legendary actress Cicely Tyson for the role of Aunt Zelda, which would have made the two witch aunts an interracial pair of sisters sharing the same magical household together on primetime network television back in the 90s. Scovell later admitted she turned the idea down at the time without much hesitation, telling her agents the casting was already leaning firmly toward Caroline Rhea, and that pairing her with Tyson as sisters simply would not make visual sense to audiences. Her agent reportedly pushed back with a sharp and remarkably simple reply, pointing out that this was, after all, a show entirely about magic and witches, so maybe one sister really could be black without anyone in the audience even blinking. Scovell later called it a bold, creative move she genuinely regretted not pursuing when she had the actual chance to make it happen, and honestly, looking back decades later, it is hard to disagree with her. Instead, the role of Zelda ultimately went to Beth Broderick, who made the character her own for 7 full seasons. But it is genuinely wild to imagine an entire alternate version of the Spellman household with a completely different dynamic anchoring every single episode. Considering how casually diverse casting was treated across 90s network television as a whole, this particular near miss stands out as one of the more fascinating what-ifs in the show's entire behind-the-scenes history. Number 8. Sabrina's entire family used to have a completely different last name altogether. Before the television series existed at all, Melissa Joan Hart first played Sabrina in a 1996 TV movie, and that earlier version looked surprisingly different from what fans eventually grew up watching every single Friday night for years. Zelda and Hilda were not played by Beth Broderick and Caroline Rhea at all in that original movie, but by actresses Charlene Furnetz and Sherry Miller instead, bringing completely different chemistry and comedic timing to the roles. And here is where it gets even weirder. The family's surname in that original film was not Spellman at all, like everyone assumes. It was actually Sawyer. When the project eventually transformed into a full weekly series for ABC, producers swapped in brand new actresses to play both aunts, and quietly reverted the family name back to Spellman, matching the original Archie Comics source material much more closely. So, technically, the beloved Spellman family that fans grew up with briefly did not exist under that exact name at all, and almost nobody watching today even remembers that it happened. The 1996 movie also played more like a straightforward supernatural comedy rather than the sharper, sitcom, paced show it eventually became, meaning practically every core element viewers associate with the franchise, the aunts, the surname, even some of the tone, was quietly rebuilt from scratch once ABC greenlit the weekly series. It is a strange reminder that plenty of beloved franchises go through an awkward, half-finished draft version before anyone ever gets the final product fans actually fall in love with. Number 7, the boyfriend who got fired and then very publicly unfired by popular demand. Harvey Kinkle, Sabrina's high school sweetheart, played by Nate Richert, seemed like a completely permanent piece of the show's emotional core from the very first episode onward. But after the series jumped networks entirely from ABC over to the WB following season 4, producers decided Sabrina needed a fresh start away from what they openly called her high school baggage, and Harvey was written off the show entirely without much warning to fans at all. That was not some accident or scheduling conflict. It was a deliberate creative choice meant to push the story firmly into college life and introduce new romantic options for Sabrina. Fans, however, were absolutely furious about the decision, flooding the network with angry letters and organized protests demanding his immediate return to the main cast. The backlash actually worked in the end. Richert came back as a full-time series regular, starting in season 6, proving that sometimes a fictional teenage romance genuinely has more staying power with a network than the very executives who tried so hard to end it for good. Interestingly, Richert had already made a brief cameo appearance during season 5, despite officially being written out, almost like the writers themselves were hedging their bets in case the fan outrage refused to die down. Looking back, the entire saga proves that audiences in the 90s could organize just as loudly as any modern online fandom. They simply had to do it with actual letters and phone calls instead of hashtags in the comment sections. It is a rare example of a network actually reversing a creative decision because enough people simply refused to let it go. And Harvey's eventual return to the finale proves the fans were right to push back so hard in the first place. Number 6, an on-screen crush that quietly turned into a genuine real-life kiss off camera. In the original 1996 TV movie, a young and mostly unknown actor named Ryan Reynolds played Seth, a charming love interest specifically written into the script to catch Sabrina's eye during the story. Off-screen, sparks apparently flew for real between the two young stars during production. On the actor's very final day of filming, he reportedly gave Melissa Joan Hart a watch as a small parting gift before leaving set for good, and the two of them ended up kissing in her hotel room shortly afterward that same night. In her memoir, Hart described the entire moment in surprisingly vivid detail, joking openly about his hands, his broad shoulders, and the overwhelming smell of hair product that apparently defined nearly the entire decade. And no, that was not the last time a future Hollywood A-lister quietly crossed paths with the wider Sabrina universe over the years, but it might genuinely be the most unexpected one, considering how few casual fans even remember Reynolds from a role that barely made it into pop culture memory at all. At the time, Reynolds was still years away from becoming a household name, meaning nobody on set had any real idea they were watching a future major movie star casually flirting his way through a made-for-TV witch movie. Looking back now, it is the kind of behind-the-scenes footnote that only becomes genuinely interesting decades later, once the rest of the world finally catches up to who he eventually became. Somewhere buried deep in Sabrina lore is proof that a future action movie superstar spent an afternoon in the 90s charming a teenage witch on a low-budget television movie set, years before anyone in Hollywood had the faintest idea what he would eventually become. Number 5. The mom who basically willed the entire show into existence through sheer stubbornness. Long before Sabrina the Teenage Witch ever became a genuine network hit, Melissa Joan Hart's own mother, Paula Hart, was quietly the driving force pushing the whole project forward behind the scenes from day one. Paula reportedly received the original Archie Comics issue almost entirely by accident from someone else, then took the concept straight to a studio and helped produce the 1996 TV movie from the ground up herself. When executives kept casually brushing off the idea of turning it into a proper weekly series afterward, Paula personally went into the editing room herself, cut together a 5-minute sizzle trailer using leftover movie footage, and pitched it directly to networks entirely on her own initiative and dime. ABC bought the concept on the spot, slotting it straight into their coveted Friday night lineup almost immediately after seeing it. Paula then stayed on as an executive producer for all 7 seasons of the show, overseeing everything from casting decisions to the music to the final editing choices herself. So essentially, Sabrina Spellman only had magic powers on screen, but off-screen, her real mother was the one quietly working the actual miracles behind the curtain. Paula's involvement did not stop at simply getting the show made either. She remained a hands-on producer for the entire run, reportedly making decisions about hiring, firing, and even musical guest appearances throughout all 7 seasons. Having your own mother essentially run the show from behind the scenes could easily have been awkward for most families. But Hart has repeatedly credited that exact arrangement with letting her focus purely on acting instead of constantly worrying about the business side of an entire network series. Number 4, the star who almost quit acting entirely before Sabrina ever existed on paper. Before landing the role that would eventually define her entire career, Melissa Joan Hart was seriously considering walking away from show business altogether, while she still had the chance to do so gracefully. Having already found success as a child star on Nickelodeon's Clarissa explains it. All years earlier, Hart later explained she deeply idolized Shirley Temple's approach to fame and legacy, planning to quit acting completely around age 20, just like her childhood icon once did, then move on to a totally different life path afterward entirely. But here is where things get genuinely interesting. Sabrina the Teenage Witch landed directly in her lap, right around that exact turning point in her life and career, and instead of stepping away from Hollywood forever like she had planned, Hart ended up starring in a series that would run for 7 full seasons and quietly define an entire generation's Friday nights for years to come. That detail would come back to haunt every casting director who assumed her career was already winding down, just as it was about to fully explode. What makes the timing even stranger is that Hart had genuinely started making peace with the idea of leaving Hollywood behind entirely, telling interviewers years later that she fully expected college and an ordinary adult life to follow, not a role that would end up defining pop culture for an entire generation of Friday night viewers. Sometimes the biggest career moment of your life shows up right when you have already convinced yourself it never will. Number 3. A very underage night out with a future global pop superstar in the making. Before Britney Spears became a worldwide icon known everywhere, she made a memorable guest appearance on Sabrina, and according to Melissa Joan Hart's own memoir, the two genuinely became close friends off-screen afterward. In one particularly wild story from the book, Hart admitted to devising an entire plan to sneak Spears out of her hotel room so the two of them could go dancing together somewhere. Since Spears was still legally a minor at the time, and reportedly craved a night around people closer to her own age for once, they lied their way straight past Spears' own bodyguard and snuck into a Los Angeles nightclub together through a back entrance to avoid attention. Once inside, though, Hart says Brittany got instantly swallowed up by the surrounding crowd of admirers, and Hart eventually found her tucked into a private booth, surrounded by people fawning over every single word she said all night. Hart later admitted with a mix of guilt and amusement that she may have accidentally taught a future global superstar exactly how to sneak in and out of nightlife completely undetected for years to come afterward. Considering how much scrutiny Spears' every move would eventually attract once her career reached its absolute peak a few years later, it is a strangely fitting bit of foreshadowing that one of her very first experiences with slipping past security happened alongside a fellow teenage television star who understood the exact same pressures. Two famous 90s kids, one borrowed bodyguard lie, and a single unforgettable night out together. Number 2, the network's actual first choice was already destined for a very different supernatural role entirely. Before Melissa Joan Hart ever put on the pointed witch hat for the cameras, the network's top pick to play Sabrina was reportedly none other than Sarah Michelle Gellar herself. Sounds harmless enough, right? Not exactly. Gellar ultimately passed on the opportunity entirely, choosing instead to fight vampires rather than cast spells over a coffee shop counter, landing the lead role in Buffy the Vampire Slayer instead just months later that same year. Just imagine an alternate universe where the two most iconic supernatural teenage heroines of the entire 1990s somehow got completely swapped, where Gellar spends her weeknights turning her aunt's coffee shop customers into toads instead of slaying demons down in Sunnydale every week. It is one of those quiet casting decisions so close to happening differently that it genuinely reshapes how an entire era of teen television might be remembered by fans watching today. Both actresses went on to become defining faces of 90s and early 2000s supernatural teen television regardless, just on entirely separate shows and entirely separate networks, which makes the whole near miss feel less like a coincidence and more like two parallel universes narrowly avoiding a collision. Somewhere out there is a version of pop culture history where the casting call sheets simply landed differently, and honestly, it is worth a moment of appreciation that we ended up with both shows existing at the same time instead of losing one entirely to the other. Number 1, the ending was hiding in plain sight since the very first episode ever aired. In the series finale, Sabrina is fully prepared to marry a man named Aaron, only to call off the entire wedding at the absolute last second and run off instead with her true soulmate, Harvey Kinkle, who arrives dramatically on his motorcycle at exactly the right moment to stop everything. But here is the detail that turns casual viewers into obsessive rewatchers overnight once they notice it. The moment Sabrina and Harvey finally reunite happens at exactly 12:36, the very same time of day they first crossed paths years earlier, back in the season 1 episode that originally established their entire relationship from scratch. And somehow, the writers had quietly planted that tiny detail years in advance without most audiences ever noticing it until the finale finally connected the dots directly for everyone watching. As the two ride off together into the sunset on his bike, the song playing is Running by No Doubt, which happens to be explicitly established as Sabrina's favorite band earlier in the series' run. So, yeah, that ending was never some rushed last-minute decision made in the writer's room. It was a payoff quietly building since the very beginning of the entire show, waiting patiently for the right moment to finally reveal itself to anyone paying close enough attention. Considering how many casting shakeups, budget cuts, rewritten holidays, and nearly different actresses this franchise survived across 7 chaotic seasons, it is honestly kind of beautiful that the writers still managed to land one perfectly quiet callback exactly when it mattered most. Sometimes the most magical detail on a show about literal witches has nothing to do with spells at all, just a clock, a soulmate, and a favorite song timed exactly right. And there you have it, 15 wild and genuinely surprising facts about Sabrina the Teenage Witch. From an almost completely different cast of aunts to a role that nearly went to a future vampire slayer instead, this show clearly had a lot more going on behind the scenes than any of us ever gave it credit for growing up. Which one shocked you the most? And which ones did we somehow completely miss along the way? Drop it in the comments below, because we always genuinely love hearing from you after every single video. And if you want more deep dives into the stars, shows, and stories you grew up watching every week, make sure to subscribe and stick around, because we have got plenty more magic where this all came from.